Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Darth Nautilus coming to you from Terra Prime headquarters. Today we've got a panel of our apprentices and knights. We will be talking about competitive sabering, which is becoming more and more popular out there through various groups and such like that. So we'll be going through that there. So first, we've got one of our knights, Anthony Iglesias from Syracuse Martial Arts and Gathering of Sabers. How you doing there, Anthony?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Pretty good, pretty good. And you've also got experience in boxing too, so that'll be a good thing to draw from as well.
Yes, sir.
And with our apprentices, we've got Ben Judkins. How you doing, Ben?
Great. How are you?
Very good, very good. John Solomon. We're gonna go right through everybody here. So bang, there you go. And Michael, how's it going, Michael?
It's going fine. How are you?
Very good, very good. And of course, Celine. How's it going, Celine?
It's going well. Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, all right. And we've got Adriano
Yes.
from the France group, Academy de Saber Laser, in Paris, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, very good. All right, so I suppose we just get right into it. Competitive sabering, or sports sabering, or whatever you want to call it. This is bringing in a kind of a new area of martial art and martial concept to the whole sabering community, which is really cool. So probably to start out, what we're going to be talking about, I'll probably delineate first of all what I'm kind of referring to as competitive, and we can talk about competitive martial arts and that kind of thing. So competitive martial arts will bring in a couple of different variables, as it were. Probably the first one is this, and I know John and I were talking about this several occasions, that the real issue that comes into play here is when you bring into something to be competitive, right? We have to make it judgeable, or somehow we have to objectify it in some way. And in order to do that, you have to set up a set of rules. And at some point, you can get to an area where you are training within the rules, and within that, as it becomes more and more ritualized, or more of a more game. Now, the idea is controversial, right? People will say that almost as a derogatory type of thing. It's not really a derogatory thing. So what I'm kind of talking about is things like, for example, competitive martial arts that I would lump into this category are things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, Taekwondo, fencing, Kendo, Wushu, on the kind of non-combative side, Sancho, which is kind of free fighting, kickboxing, judo, all of these types of martial arts, which a lot of them have events in the Olympics. A lot of them have tournaments, which are contain large numbers of people, right? And very kind of systematized types of things. Right now, of course, MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are extremely popular because of just the popularity of the sport, and because it's provides a lot of good exercise, and there's a lot of good camaraderie, and the techniques are very very good and very easily applicable in kind of real life. And that's where really the things come in, or when the arguments start to come in, is how applicable is this? And a lot of people will say things are not applicable in this way and not applicable in that way. But it's not, I don't want to get out or start this off on the idea that one is better than the other, or that there's no overlap between any of these martial arts and sports and all that kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. We're only kind of talking about the competitive aspect of martial arts, and there are certain martial arts which are, kind of centered around a competitive aspect. Now, I know, Ben, you can speak to this too. In Chinese martial art, there is a large, or just in Chinese culture, in the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, a large push for more kind of Westernish type of methodologies, things that, they started introducing actually Western sports into the curriculums at, at a higher pace. And this started to influence a little bit of Chinese martial art as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that you couldn't underestimate the impact of the YMCA and all of those mission schools bringing in Western sports programs. And this just fundamentally reorganizes on a very basic level how people in China were thinking about their own physical culture and what you could do with physical culture, and take for granted in Chinese martial arts organization today, especially more modern oriented arts, product of the YMCA. It's got as much to do with basketball as it does old-fashioned martial arts.
Absolutely. And my teacher, in fact, it was a huge basketball player. He loved basketball. And he followed it all the time. It was, so I got a very traditional Chinese kung fu teacher who's really into basketball and that whole thing. And it's part of that culture. And one of the things about, and of course in Japanese arts and kendo and judo and all of that and that kind of thing, it's the same type of thing. They're bringing in that kind of codification. And I think what they're seeing in that, like a lot of the people, a lot of the founders of all of these movements, which of course we, from traditional martial arts of all stripes, kind of base our stuff on. These people saw that the competitive aspect of that brings out a new and very important, perhaps missing component of a lot of these systems, which were either intended for war or self-preservation in urban and suburban settings, that kind of thing. And I've gone on this a lot, that if you look at competitive martial arts versus kind of non-competitive martial arts, just separating those two things by that criteria, the competitive martial arts tend to have a physical edge. There's a training edge. They tend to work out a little bit harder. And I think because there's a goal, it's a goal-oriented type of thing. Whereas in a lot of the traditional martial arts and non-competitive martial arts, like Tai Chi, a lot of times, although there is competitive Tai Chi, I'm not going to say there isn't, but in, say, like a lot of the regular old Tai Chi that you would see people doing in the park, which is non-competitive for health and all that, you see less of a drive for that. Now, you see maybe a different population too, somebody who's not necessarily out to push themselves beyond their own limits, but just to kind of extend their own limits because of health problems and that kind of thing. But regardless, you still see that distinction. And probably the best example of this, and I'm going to turn this over here to Anthony in a second here, because one of the best places to look at the way fighters are trained for competition is boxing, right? Boxing and boxing trainers are legendary for bringing out that type of performance in a person and in a fighter. And when you're talking about boxing, you're talking about something so very primitive. We've been boxing as a competitive martial art since the Stone Age, you know. So, do you have what's your view on that kind of thing, on the whole training for competition versus not having that aspect there?
As I've said it many, many times, I think that the sport mentality is probably one of the best things you can do, one of the best things you can add to your mindset as a martial artist in general, whether you're a competitor or not. Because what I love about sports, and not just in martial arts, but in anything, whether it's baseball, football, tennis, is because you always know that there's someone better than you. You push yourself harder and harder to be the best because you don't want to lose. And I think a lot of traditional martial artists, and this isn't a slam to traditional martial artists because I am one, I think a lot of traditional martial artists don't embrace that. They think that what they're doing is top shelf and secret, and they don't need to train like an athlete. And so they kind of convince themselves of what I think is a false and damaging mentality. So as far as the competitive side of it, I think it's actually incredibly beneficial, both physically and mentally, because you develop that mental toughness, you develop that that no quit attitude, that the acceptance of loss, the acceptance of errors, and you look at loss and errors as learning experiences as opposed to someone who is just not used to not getting their way. And when you have compliant partners, you always get your way. But when you have a non-compliant partner, well, you have to work, you have to earn it. And so I guess that's the other side of it is, we have that saying, I won't say the Cantonese because, pardon me, my Cantonese is terrible, but it's called "Don't talk with the mouth, talk with the hands." The hands, or the actual doing, the actual competing with someone or someone's, I think, is the ultimate truth. One of my favorite Kali fighters, Top Dog Mark Nollis from the Dog Brothers, he said there is no better Zen-like moment than when a Kali stick is zipping past your face. And so for me, the sport mentality is an absolute must if you really want to push yourself to the higher levels. I guess that's where I'm going with that. Yeah.
And I think one thing you touched on there that I think we should probably bring up, because it's something that's been in the news a lot. All of you probably have seen it, which is the Tai Chi guy going up against the MMA guy in China, right?
Yeah.
And he gets creamed, really. I'll preface this with saying this. I think the whole kind of setup was pretty shady. Number one, I know the guy's idea, the MMA fighter's idea, is that he's calling out charlatans, right, who exist out in the martial art world, who do indeed exist out there and are indeed a problem. The thing about it is that a charlatan knows that they're a charlatan, right? No charlatan is going to show up for that challenge. Not a single charlatan is going to show up to that challenge. The only people that are going to show up to the challenge are people who are deluded enough to think that they can do this without any experience. And so what you really had in that thing was not a fight between a traditional martial art and a modern martial art. You had you had a fight between, and this goes directly to our point, a kind of a teacher of a physical discipline versus a highly trained, current fighter who's currently training and currently fighting at the time. I don't care what martial art you're doing. If you have that discrepancy, right? Yeah, the younger, stronger, trained fighter is going to come out on top. They have the experience. They know what's going to happen there, right? And some 43-year-old or, or how, I don't even know how old the Taiji master was, but he looked considerably older than the MMA fighter. It's like, that's not even come on, And now I get it, right? A lot of people think in traditional martial arts that that's what it will enable you to do. And to a certain extent, yes, it can help a smaller person defend themselves from a larger person. But defense is not fighting. Defense is escape, right? When you're fighting and you're competing, you're not leaving the confrontation. You're getting in there, and you're getting in there to win, right? To win and to overcome the other person. Your efforts are no longer there to help the other person. They're there to hinder them. And that's what's coming at you. And I think one of the things that comes up a lot in martial arts, and this is really the core of the issue, is that if you're practicing a martial art and you don't have that, is it still a martial art, right? Now, sure, I think it does. It is, right? Because just because you're not actively fighting doesn't mean that it's not an art that is derived from fighting, right? Just because you can't use it in that context doesn't mean that changes the nature of what you're doing. But as you get further and further away from it, the less you do. And I've always said this, that the only way to learn how to fight is to fight. You can't get it just from solo work. You can prepare yourself for a fight solo, right? You can work out, you can work on your reflexes and try to prepare yourself. But you don't expect to be awesome just by doing that. You expect only, can I survive long enough to get out of this situation? That's all you can do. Bringing a sport into it, even if you have an extremely limiting rule set, you get this, right? So whereas you kind of got like two different spectrums. You got on one side, you have sports which may not even resemble the martial art that they came from, say fencing, like foil fencing and stuff like that. It sort of resembles it, but it's because of certain rules like right of way and all of this other stuff, right? It's a little bit more divorced from swordplay than other things, right? And on the other hand, you've got, say, something like wushu, right, where it's basically just the dance routines that are used to train for that, and then you've got everything in the middle, right? So it's a really, really big thing. So on one side, you've got this, but not a whole lot of the technique. On other here, you got lots and lots of techniques, but you don't got none of this, right? So where is it? I don't think anything lies, continuously in there. And I think that you can transfer skills from one to the other. That I think is pretty good.
That's actually something I'd like to touch on again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up. You have the two extremes. You have those who train in a traditional art and they never pressure test. They really don't, like you said, clash and have someone throwing punches that they don't expect, or kicks or whatever, or if it's with a sword and so on. And then you have the other side where there's zero skill. They just go in like two bulls and they go at it. And then there's that middle ground, which I think is where you really want to be. You really want to focus on making your skills work, and you have to have that middle ground. You don't just go in and fight, but you shouldn't be just training forms and dead drills. That's what we call them, dead drills, where the other person is, again, completely compliant. So that middle ground is super important. I'm so glad you brought that up. Because
Yes.
that's something that we really need to focus on in martial arts in general. Is where is that that medium ground, and that comes back to the whole you know, the yin and yang symbol is the balance, I guess is the best word. Another thing I wanted to touch on is I run a Facebook group. I don't hang out really in any martial art groups on Facebook, but I actually run one. And the reason why I started it was because I didn't like not having control of the content. And, you know, as a Wing Chun instructor, I was being invited forcefully, obviously, because they can invite you anytime they want, to all these Wing Chun groups. And all I ever saw in these groups is just a lot of talk, pictures of them posing, and dead drills and demo, and a lot of chi sao. And chi sao is like push hands. It's like, it's an exercise. So I created a group called Wing Chun Fighters. And one of the main rules of the group is if you talk big, you have to provide proof that you back up your talk. So they have to provide video. The other rule is absolutely no demos. And, you know, so if somebody comes in with rehearsed demos to make themselves look good, the video gets deleted, because we want to focus on skill being applied to pressure. And I think that's important. You know, you can have all the fanciness you want and it's not real, or you can have two people just going in there and just smashing each other to bits and have no skill. You get no place fast in both extremes. And so you want to bring it to that middle ground.
Yeah. There's that, yeah, right. I mean, that middle ground there's also the middle ground between having lots of rules to where things are really, really formalized, and, you know, but having that competition. Greco-Roman wrestling is a good one, you know, where very, very formalized, the way you start and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, sure, you're never going to start like that in real life, but, you know, well, you can't do stuff from, you know, yeah, everybody has to use their imagination here a little bit. Speaking of the middle ground, probably an interesting middle ground for us as Saberists would be SCA. And there's a lot of people that come from the SCA. Now, John, you're a member of the SCA. Bring up what are some of the issues that come up in that kind of milieu?
So I've been fighting in the SCA for about 22 years. I haven't been super active in the last several years, but when I was young, of course, in my 20s, I was very active, and because I got to put on armor and hit people with sticks. So the SCA has a lot of rules. Obviously, the intention was originally to have fun, and then it became to replicate medieval combat. How accurately they replicate medieval combat, certainly up for debate. So like no hitting the knee or below, safety issue, right? Generate too much force, angles, so on and so forth. So knee hits and below don't count. Try to keep people from banging on knees. Hand hits, because they're too easy. Of course, this is something we'd see a lot in things. The actual hand in 1 inch saves people from getting their hands smashed and broken. And there's over the years there's been various force rules: excessive force, too much force. But essentially, you have to provide a solid blow that would injure someone through chainmail or a basic iron helmet. So that's up for some debate, but we have umpires, or marshals as we call them, on the field. They test you, rate you. You have to pass a registration. Anybody that doesn't know, you actually go through a little bit of training. And mostly the training isn't about skill. It's about safety and understanding the rules and how hard you have to hit and so on and so forth. And a lot of the training is done like kind of on the job. It's like, all right, well, you passed your authorization. You're good enough to fight with, you know, basic weapons. If you want more advanced weapons, 2 weapons, great weapons, spears, halberds, whatever, you do a little bit of training and show some proficiency with it, and then so on and so forth. One of the things I realized moving through my career in in fighting is that the techniques in the SCA became techniques about fighting in the SCA. So the common tournament styles quickly revolved around hitting the other person before they hit you, because that's the only rule that really mattered. So it wasn't necessarily about whether the strike was realistic or even feasible with a broadsword. One of the most popular things is like when you get in a big press with a shield, right? So you got like, your classic medieval shields and, your basic stance up here or here. You come in and you close in and you do a wrap. So you can picture using the back of the false edge of your broadsword to hit somebody in the back of the helmet. Now, I've actually witnessed people killing themselves with this move as a person ducks. Kind of hard in full armor, but it's happened. But it's that's an extreme example, but that's one of the techniques that's just really unrealistic. I mean, it might work, and I'm sure somebody probably did it in the Middle Ages because you do have a double-edged sword, and if they got, but so quickly, I realized this as I started when I'd been in the SCA for about 10 years fighting. I started training in this Japanese swordsmanship that I do, Shinkendo. And I began to realize that looking at the techniques they use in the SCA and traditional sword techniques, and then like that was right about the time that a lot of the HEMA guys started pushing real big in these classic, bringing back the Fiore and the German longsword techniques and things like that, and that started to make a big push into the society, and that was really interesting for everyone to see how different it really was than what everybody had been doing for 40 years in the society, playing our own game. And that was fine. We had fun. We still, and it's still fun. I still do it as often as I can. But the fact that as soon as I started studying traditional swordsmanship and applying those ideas, I started being really bad at the SCA, like really bad. When I was okay, I was never great, but I was pretty good. And and then I started applying these ideas, and I became really bad at winning the game of trying to hit the other person first because I was adding more power and I was trying to make my strikes more realistic instead of just holding my shield in front of me with my sword, making if you can picture a triangle, and then whacking the other guy with my forearm with my broadsword, which is like the law was a going tournament technique for a very long time. That was how everybody stood. You think about a gigantic wooden shield, how much arm and shoulder strength it would take to hold it out like this, and with your sword out, 3 feet out in front of you. And I was just like, well, I don't use a shield, so that works for me. But so that's some of the issues you run into. But ultimately, the society is a game, and like I said, the movement of Western martial arts has made a vast improvement in the techniques and what everybody thinks they're doing, which I think is really impressive in the SCA, that people continue to evolve and move through this as these ideas became more popular and more accessible through groups like HEMA and the Knights of St. George, I think it was, that came out and did several demos and taught classes on Fiore style longsword. So that was very cool.
Yeah. HEMA too is a really good example because that's coming from a very historical point of translating and interpreting old text, and it's now becoming one of the most kind of vibrant competition sports out there for swords right now. I mean, it's where the most interesting stuff I find is happening is in HEMA right now, and there's lots of competitions now. The levels are getting built up, a lot, in that way. But, and then you have, I think probably another example real quick is Battle of Nations. If anybody's seen Battle of the Nations, this is like, it's essentially, and I think Matt Easton of Scholar Gladiatoria mentioned this, that it's kind of like arena fighting, or tournament fighting back in the Middle Ages or whatever, where they're just playing with blunted weapons. But it's not. People think that's how knights fought, like on the battlefield and stuff like that. It's not, because if you watch them, they're essentially clubbing each other over the head with a sword, in that way.
The tournaments were called melee, and that's where the term melee comes from. They just jump in there with blunted weapons or wood weapons and just smash each other down and try to win.
Yeah. Hey, you know, I understand it. I get it. People like doing that, doing that kind of thing. There's the Dago here, you know, people and all that kind of stuff. And hey, we do it here too. All right. So,
well, if I could jump in there though, what do we do with this, right? Because we've got now all of this great HEMA footage on YouTube. You know, Anthony was just talking about his Wing Chun Fighters group. There are all these other lightsaber leagues out there, you know, the Saber Sport League, and they all have different rule sets. They're probably different than the rule sets that we compete under, but how can we use all of the film and footage that they're putting out in our training as we think about being competitive saberists, you know, competing under a different rule set than Ludo Sport or, you know, the Saber Legion? How do I use all of the resources that they're putting out there in terms of, you know, recorded fights and all of that?
right, yeah, that's a good point, right? Because we've got a lot of this stuff, and there is that, and it is okay. So here's what I would propose first, is that when we look at those fights, we have to look at the competition things as what they are, right? It's going to be very close to realism. That's at least the speed that you have to be able to apply all of this stuff, right? Whatever rule set or whatever you're doing, that's how fast things have to move, right? So whether you're watching an Olympic fencing match or a HEMA match, right, which is going to be relatively far or close depending on your point of view, whatever you're looking at something that's going fast, right? And the speed of competition is fast, just like a boxer's hands, they are fast, right? Everybody is very, very fast, you know. So that would be, you know, one thing I would say. Now let's see. In the French league, you have a rule set which is designed for a specific to give a specific impression, shall we say, right? So you're kind of dictating how you want these matches to look, correct?
Yes. Cedric give us rules about fighting competition at the early of the year, and during all the year we tried a lot of things, and we reflect about possibilities. And what we saw was at the beginning the rules were very, very, very simple, and when somebody was looking the fighting outside, he said us that it was look like a kendo fight or a fencing fight, and that was a thing that was a little annoying for us, because we are doing a lightsaber, something that is beautiful to see. And during the year we put in rules to slow down the fights and to allow big movement, more beautiful movement. And that's a thing that we put very, very early in the year. It's a preparation movement that oblige us to put the blade behind us to take speed and strength, and that allow to the defender to prepare a parry or to put in security by an avoid or something like that. And using that during the year, we saw very, very more sophisticated fights, and that was everything that was said tonight. That was a real reflection that we had in the year, because we don't wanted fights that look like too much for fencing, so very linear and very speed, and that was we wanted to have the fighting feeling, but more beautiful than what we can see in the fighting today.
Yeah, so that's a good point. When you put people together to fight, it's not pretty. It's I bring up one of my favorite movies, which is a Thai version of Rashomon, and I think it's Encounter at the Ghost Gate or something of that nature. It's a really, really good version of the Rashomon story, which, if you know, is basically a specific encounter told from various points of view, and you get other people's points of view.
Yes.
And two of the characters in it are an outlaw and a knight, or some kind of hero, and the knight or the hero describes the incident of him stepping forward and fighting off the cowardly, the cowardly outlaw, and the outlaw describes it as the incompetent and arrogant hero who he can just bat away because he's just some guy. And then at the end, you've got a third point of view, or fourth, I can't even remember how many, of somebody who nobody knew was there, seeing it from from outside, and it basically is just two guys with swords standing about 15 feet away from each other, swinging in midair at each other, and that was the reality of that was the claimed reality of that incident. And I've been in a lot of fights, like not knife fight or sword fights, but like fist fights and stuff like that. I can tell you, that's what it's like. There's no bob and weave and stuff like that. It's a big, huge tangle. People end up on the ground, and it's just it's chaos. So it doesn't look nice. So one of the ways that you guys did it, and one of the uses for a rule set is to make it more of a spectacle. Give it a little bit of time. I mean, why is boxing limited to so few moves? Well, to drag that thing out. We want to see a fight. We don't want to see two people come in there, boom, okay, this guy's the winner, next. That would not be fun. There would be no betting on that. So, yeah. So that's another reason. Now, another reason that people put in rules is for skill, or or what have you. Fencing is probably a good example of that. Kendo, Celine, you're involved with that, where and just like boxing, where they've stripped down the techniques to be in this very narrow, field. So like in fencing, unfortunately, Jared is not here to give us, the kind of insight. I'll try to touch on it a little bit. But we have the issues of touches and right of way and doing this thing. All of these these rules they're kind of a constraint that is analogous, I think, in my view, to the constraint of being in actual battle. Where I've said this a lot of times, that in a free fight, in a battle, in anything like that, we have this imagination that we're going to be able to do whatever we want, right? And that's what a free fight is, right? But the fact of the matter is, you find out you can do very little once you get in there. Once you have somebody standing right across from you, and you're going, okay, it becomes it's a totally different thing. Things you think you could have done aren't really available to you, and in swordplay or whatever, if you had a sharp weapon at you, you're going to end up 15 feet away from each other, swinging in midair, because, well, who wants to be near a huge razor blade flying through the air, right? So these are all kind of kind of things, but a rule set that you have to follow so that you're not just randomly hitting people. Another thing I saw in Scholar literature, and this goes to what you were saying, Anthony, earlier, is I guess there was fencing matches between French and British soldiers in the war, and the duels, and the British soldiers would basically win every duel just by, because they were fighting with small swords and sabers and stuff like that, and they would just rush in, push the guy's sword away, and then hack him. And of course, the French were like, "Oh, so uncivilized, blah blah blah," and the British were like, "Yeah, but we are alive and you're dead." So
that's actually a really good point. I want to touch on the whole rules thing. There's all these. When it comes to weaponry, I'm going to stick with weaponry for this one. There's so many different rule sets, and for example, the rule set that we use is based off of Filipino martial arts, right? And so for us, hand strikes are an important part of that because that's the concept of defanging the snake. Now, a hand strike isn't going to work spectacularly well if that person has a giant, armored hand or something, and it might loosen the grip. But when you're dealing with people that were using machetes and knives and they didn't have a lot of armor, hand strikes were incredibly effective. So again, because of our rules, the matches will look way different than another group that doesn't count hand strikes, that only strikes to the body and in the head. So like you were saying, the rules will definitely change the way things look, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, sometimes more realistic, sometimes not at all. So that's what I really wanted to touch on. That with us, knee strikes are dangerous, but it's a valid strike. And so we make sure, some of our people will make sure that they put, armor on their legs, but the main thing is the control that's involved in that rule set. If there's no control, if you're not actually showing skill, well then, it's like my music teacher used to say, practice crap, it's going to be crap. So we want to focus on making sure that the rule set, that we're adhering to that. If the hand strikes are legal, then things are going to look different, but for us, that's a realistic point of view.
Now, yeah, and that's the thing. We generally, when we're here at HQ, we generally do count hand strikes. This past camp, I experimented with a new kind of pedagogy with the kids, and we didn't count hand strikes, and we just did head strikes, but we didn't even teach them to strike. We just taught them to parry, and then instructed them to touch the mask of the opponent. And we got some impressively logical fights out of these kids, right? They understood, they came in, they quickly understood the value of the bind. So they would immediately try to bind the other person up. They weren't just swinging at each other, right? So that's the thing. And so another thing that we've done, and this is going to be going up, we're going to have a little thing on this called a head hunt, where it's basically a game, which we'll have like a mini little tournament of it, where the target is only the head, and this kind of encourages you to be more proactive in trying to get through defenses, and then it makes you far more wary of your defenses as well, because you only have one area to protect now. So that's often a fun game, and this is another reason for the rules. That's in that sense. Celine, you've been unfortunately, we're kind of quiet over here. Do you have anything to add to this discussion from either your sabering or your kendo or anything like that?
I think something that I guess I can kind of add as far as kendo, ironically, has quite a few similarities to SCA. I mean, the history is obviously different, but that evolution of going from basically what was supposed to be originally medievally inspired, and also kind of having a certain set of rules, making it look more formalized and judged, having like I don't know how many umpires SCA uses. I suppose it's based on the size of the group you've got, but in kendo there's always 3, and there's very much a a set of rules. It has to look like it would be a wounding strike through what would be the chainmail of samurai armor versus where the plates would be, and or wound somebody through the kabuto, the traditional Japanese helmet. So there is a lot of parallels there, but just I guess a quick note on the history as well. The rules had to get a lot more Western kind of sport oriented, as Chad was mentioning earlier, because from Kendo's original inception in the 1600s up until the Second World War, the winner was the one who didn't get knocked out, like, because Kendo was basically kenjutsu with the shinai, so that the samurai didn't kill each other. It was just the first one to, stay, or the last one standing. Whereas now, of course, with passing this, or the end of the Second World War, it became much more sport, appropriate for non-militaristic use, and now we don't throw each other to the ground, we don't try and rip each other's headpieces off as part of victory conditions or knock each other out. Now it's who can score 2 good points with good form, and that's something I think that's been mentioned kind of across the panel earlier, is that form is very much important to modern kendo, because it's not just a matter of, ha, I smacked you in the head. It's, did you have the intent to deliver what would essentially be a fatal blow to the head if it were a real fight? And it has that very a much more rigid rule set than I guess it would have been in the feudal times in Japan. But at the same token, it looks a lot better than I'm sure it did, because there's no visceral of scattering the landscape either. So I guess it's definitely gotten a lot more tame over the years, but at the same time there is that modern training aspect that Anthony mentioned, of going through and really training that never quit attitude. This kind of the same thing as the boxers, doing a lot of the physical training, the mental endurance, and really training up your speed and things like that, and not just being the first one to deliver a killing blow and then that's it. Whereas, we'll just, especially now with the Canadian Nationals going up, that's just what we've been doing for the last month, is we just basically just training really hard, free sparring in tournament conditions.
Yeah. Now that's another thing too, is a lot of rule sets will be, and I know this comes into a lot with kendo and a lot of Asian martial arts, probably Kali as well, I think, is that there's also this, and we've had this idea, and I'm sure this came up in the French system too, is that when you're judging these things at this point, you have to have some ability for somebody watching to see if somebody gets a good shot in or not. So you have to have these criteria, right? Because I mean, it's not easy to recognize this stuff and pick it out of the air, to even, to even score these things, no matter how many people you've kind of got going around. And so there's lots of different methods that have been come up with to kind of do that. one of the things that I think with the competition aspect of it too is, and when I'm talking about the competition training, is there seems to be a lot more, at least nowadays, a lot more, the more sport it becomes, the more focus on physical prowess and athleticism there is. So the more sporty it gets, the more you see these guys in the gym, right? And the better physical condition you actually see them in. Because they, that's part of the milieu. And like Ben, like we were talking about earlier, that's something that was introduced even into the Asian martial arts, and it's a large part of modern wushu. Even the traditional backgrounds and stuff like that I come from have links to modern wushu, and thus through the Republican period and way back into the Ming, same type of thing. Is you've got this there's a training for it. In my martial art, we call it tongbei, through cultivation, where it's not just, we know that it's you have to have a variety of skills, and you have to kind of do that. When you get into like boxing gyms, I mean, they're gyms. They got weights. They got this. They got trainers. They got people helping them with their physical ability. When you've got you've got more modern type of things, and then you start kind of moving over here. Luckily nowadays, wushu athletes are starting to get more like that, getting far more modern equipment and modern stuff because of all the injuries they've had. My teacher of wushu, Ma Chao, had reconstructive knee surgery at 23. So yeah, now that's a sport that is hard on you. Let's just say. But anyway, so there's lots of reasons why you would come up with a rule set, and if you're trying to come up with rule sets, like we use a variety of rule sets with my group. I try to take a little bit from there and try out different concepts and see what's going. We recently were trying out some right-of-way concepts in that we are generally kind of coming from a more HEMA-ish type of kind of thing, mainly because most of the people I started sparring with were HEMA guys, and Vornok and them, they're bringing that aspect into it. I usually tell people, look for a HEMA club when people are saying what kind of traditional martial art or what kind of martial art do you recommend to take with sabering and stuff like that. Anything sword-based, fencing, kendo, anything like that. But if you a HEMA club, if you have a HEMA club near you, I mean, they really have some interesting stuff going in there, and there's a lot of resources now, and it's a really booming martial art that I think everybody from a lot of disciplines can benefit from, as far as resource goes. But yeah, Ben, before we go, I wanted to just mention this, because a little competitive aspect of this, and we mentioned it with the MMA guy and the Taiji guy, but turn of the century, this was really commonplace. People having grudge matches on the Leitai. It was usually like a Westerner versus a Chinese guy or some foreigner or something like that. But oftentimes it was school versus school and all that. Where did that fit into all of the kind of sporting idea? Because that might give us some.
Yeah, like you said, that was very common. As a matter of fact, I had a blog post that I put up where I looked at a article. I think it was written by a kind of famous Chinese author, and it was either 1928 or 1932. But he was talking about how badly humiliated all of the Tai Chi people had just been in one of these big Lai Tai tournaments. That, you know, this was it. This was the death of Tai Chi. This exposed them as the fraud that they were. They weren't actually training. And it sounds like such a modern argument. You know, you could hear it as a journalist talking about this recent fight. And then you look at the date and it's like, you know, 1928 or whatever. Then you realize these discussions are not new. This is like the only discussion that we have had in the martial arts. We just keep having the same discussion. It's the only one we do over and over again, all the way back.
Yep. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. We've got a couple of questions here. One thing here, I see here, what is HEMA? HEMA is Historical European Martial Arts. So German longsword, the German things, Fiore, as John mentioned, lots of Italian, English, and Spanish, French sources, all of that, bringing that in there, and then they bring it into a lot of the competition. That's where I think HEMA is really excelling right now, is the combative portion of it, having a good, like I said, I want to create a good laboratory for us to kind of play with this kind of stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Do anybody have any closing remarks before we close the show for the evening?
I'll add a little tiny thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just to anybody out there listening, you know, if you feel that, if you're on the fence about competition or sparring or anything like that, you know, the only way you're going to know is to just kind of start off slowly, you know, dip your toe in the water and find a place that stresses safety, I think, is an important thing.
Yes.
One of the things that really worries me, especially in the lightsaber community, not so much in martial arts community, but in lightsaber, is unsafe practices. And I don't just mean lack of equipment. I also go to the opposite end of too much equipment and people just going toe to toe and beating on each other. So I guess where I would go with that is just people, if this is something you want to get into, you know, do your due diligence, do some background checks on the people you're working with, find out if they actually are qualified instructors, because an unqualified instructor is a very, very dangerous thing. And so if you're going to go out there and you want to get involved in some kind of martial art, whether it be traditional martial art or, you know, what I consider now the lightsaber martial arts that we have been working on in you know, all these years now, is really do your due diligence. Make sure you know who you're training with and do it. It's a wonderful thing, but please be safe. You know, you can develop really good skill and have a great time doing it. I mean, I really admire kendo, for example. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful sport because there's not just the pressure testing and the skill and the safety, but more importantly, and this is, I think, the thing that I love the most about kendo, it's the etiquette. It's the decency that they have towards each other and their competitors and their training. And I think that is an important thing to nurture in anything, whether it be traditional martial art or sport. And that's all I have to say.
If I can just do a quick jump off from Anthony's point. And I know this kind of it is a big thing in kendo, the manners and respect for your opponent. That's something that can even be broader, whether it's sabering community, historical European martial arts, or whatever you do. Having respect for your opponent and your opponent respecting you is kind of, I suppose, the number one way to be safe, as Anthony was just pointing out. If there is that respect, then it is probably a safer environment, where, as opposed to an environment that seems very cavalier about everything. So I'll just kind of throw that out there. But also, even if for those who are maybe, again, on the fence about competition, you don't have to necessarily go into competition thinking, am I going to bring home trophy, medal, the ThinkGeek gift certificate, whatever the grand prize happens to be. The tournament is whatever art you're training at. That's aside from sparring. That's a great way to I think pressure test. It was the phrase we were using. It's a good way to gauge yourself, your own growth, and have some fun. You don't have to just go to a tournament to just to try and take home hardware. So, I mean, that's the lecture we always get before the start of a tournament at Hamilton Kendo Club. Go out, have fun, and it's a way of gauging your own self-improvement. It's not just about winning everything. So if for those who might be oh, I don't know if I'm going to win, how good am I? Well, it's a great way of finding out and then expanding your horizons, because you know where your level is. Now you know how to elevate it.
Well, so yeah, and that's, I think one of the things that is really important to note is that competition is competition, right? Like I said before, fighting is fighting, right? Competition is fighting, right? It's not realistic. It won't ever be realistic. Don't think about it like that. And so if you're worried about, what it means for your skill and all of that, like you said, you don't have to enroll or enroll in tournaments and go out there and put it out there for everybody to see, but you want to test yourself. Competition gives you something that you're not going to get when you're just drilling with partners, right? You're going to get something uncooperative. Whether that's just, like arm wrestling, for Christ's sake. You could probably fill the void somewhat with, something as simple as that, right? Because most people are not used to somebody not cooperating and trying to force somebody to do something, either make a mistake or get into a place where they can get hit. And no, it doesn't necessarily mean, the same thing, because we said, like in self-defense is an entirely different mindset, right? You're looking to get out, escape, run, get, all that kind of stuff. You're not looking there to see, okay, now how am I going to, outsmart this particular opponent? No. And we are kind of divorced from a lot of context now, especially with sports or whatever. But with sabering, I think that's a good point that Anthony makes, because there's a lot of places. I know you guys out in France have a lot of experience in. I know Cedric has a lot of experience in his martial art. I know Anthony, you've got experience in boxing and all kinds of stuff like that. All of these places, that we kind of associate with, we like having somebody in there. And one of our rules is that you have to, if you're going to spar, if you're going to do that type of thing, uncooperative work, you have to work with somebody who has experience with it, because that's a specific thing, right? And it's something that you cannot really get without doing it. Now, you don't have to do it to the point where you're at a really high level, right? Like it's just like, you can be a pretty good tennis player. You don't have to be John McEnroe good, right? You don't have to be Venus Williams good to be a pretty good tennis player, right? You can still have a whole lot of fun playing tennis when you're not playing at that level. And there's an argument for saying that it's probably more fun playing at the lower levels than playing up at the top ones, because there's less pressure. But anyway, it's a valuable aspect of all of this kind of stuff, right? It's one aspect, and it is its distinct aspect of it, but it's really, really essential. And I know it's becoming very, very popular now with, like we said, a lot of the groups, Saber Legion and that kind of thing, coming out with these things. And there's a lot of people getting together and do this. We really, really urge you, be very conscious about safety. right? Very conscious about safety. It is easy. This stuff is not necessarily specifically rated for what we do. It is possible to injure yourself even wearing gear if you're not doing it well. Anthony saying that a lot of people who come to the classes are wondering why we hit so light, but you know, you need to be quick. You don't necessarily need to hit hard, right? Especially with a lightsaber. Lightsaber is supposed to be a really big labor-saving device, right? You can cut through steel doors and stuff, right? So we shouldn't have to do anything but that, right? Just draw a line. There we go.
Well, there's an interesting video out there. I'm sorry if you ever heard of Bob, he has a video where he has a side of beef hanging by a rope, like this tiny little rope, and he pulls out his knife and lightning fast, he just, and he puts a gash in it this long, about 3 inches deep, and it was lightning fast. And he was just really trying to emphasize that it doesn't take this immense swing and power to do a lot of damage with an edged weapon. Now we're talking lightsaber. Now I know lightsabers don't exist, but we pretend it does. And even if swap that lightsaber with a 4-foot razor blade. You know, you don't need, unless there's armor, you don't need a lot of power behind it to cause damage. So yeah.
Well, and if you do have armor, even if you do have armor, you're not getting through that armor by swinging hard.
Exactly.
There's no way you're getting through it.
Yeah, and then it takes control to hit the spots that are the soft spots. I mean, that was a big thing in samurai sword play, was they knew that they had all this armor, and a lot of the strikes were engineered to go for the soft spots. Well, how do you get that? Control, skill. Yeah.
Well, I think most of the time in armored fighting, it's with half swording, where you literally just come in there and stick your sword in and
yeah.
Like we said, real fighting ain't pretty.
Not pretty.
Anyway, all right, we are at the end of the time here. I want to thank our panel for coming here. It was a nice, lively discussion. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in. Thank you for coming in and giving us the update from France. That was good of you to. I know it's late for you guys over there in Europe. Michael accidentally had a problem with his camera, so he dropped out. But well, thank everybody else. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sticking by us, and we will see you in 2 weeks with another show. Until then, have a great day. Happy sabering.